Every day, the world presents you with hundreds of headlines. What do you believe? Who do you trust? The Financial Times cuts through complexity with clarity, accuracy, and global perspective. Its journalism is guided by independence, not agendas. That's why leaders in business, policy, and culture turn to one trusted source. For facts, for insight, for what matters next. Source FT. Read more and subscribe at ft.com.
You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 5th of December 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Pope Leo XIV unwraps his souvenir snow globes from Istanbul and Beirut, high-end fashion eats itself, and an informed preview of this weekend's Formula One showdown. I'm Andrew Mueller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Mueller. Monocle editors and contributors Juliet Linley and Natalie Theodosi will discuss the day's news in papal diplomacy and fashion. Monocle producer Laura Kramer will report on the build-up to Monocle's Paris Christmas market. We'll hear from former Monocle presenter Ted Kravitz about his new book of recollections from the pit lanes of Formula One, and we'll have our weekly wrap-up of what we've learned. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Mueller. Pope Leo XIV has returned from his first trip abroad in his newish role, 6 days in Turkey and Lebanon, fulfilling an itinerary sketched by his late predecessor, Pope Francis. Leo said pretty much what might have been expected about the Middle East's myriad conflicts, i.e. that he would prefer if they stopped, everyone just got along, etc. But he did strike some fresh-ish notes as probably the first occupant of the throne of St. Peter to grapple with the ethical challenges posed by artificial intelligence. Though this was, of course, not the first time the church he leads has expressed unease with scientific advances, he at least did not propose hauling Sam Altman or other tech bros in front of any sort of inquisition. I'm joined with more by Juliet Linley, journalist and former Vatican correspondent. Juliet, first of all, did it strike you that he had an agenda of his own beyond fulfilling Francis's promise to visit these countries?
I wouldn't say so. I think it was more about showing continuity in the previous papacy and into his own, following what Francis had organized, as you said. And I don't think he was trying to get out there and put out very, very different messages. I mean, messages of peace building and bridge building are pretty common amongst popes when they travel. But it's interesting that you bring up the AI aspect because I mean, this guy is as tech savvy as popes come, if you want. And if you look even at the name choice, right, he chose Leo XIV in honor, if you want, of Leo XIII, who was very vocal in speaking about the social impact of the Industrial Revolution. So Pope Leo has often spoken about AI and the revolution that is causing and is going to cause in the future. And he's very concerned about the human aspect of that revolution. And this is a pretty modern pope. He also plays Wordle, Andrew. I thought you'd like to know that. And he uses a different word every day to start.
Just going back to, though, his preoccupation with AI, we're still trying to figure out, of course, what sort of pope he intends to be. But does it look like technology is going to be a preoccupation of his? And do we think the church has got any less suspicious of it than it has been historically? I mean, especially if we're talking about artificial intelligence, which does, have pretensions to be this fount of supreme knowledge.
For sure, he's far more concerned about it than Francis was, for instance. And I don't think we're going to be soon having, chatbots saying mass for you online. And I don't think anyone is using ChatGPT to write his sermons for him or anything. But he's definitely progressive, and he's organized several already to date. He's only been in the papacy for 7 months. Several encounters at the Vatican relating to tech, relating to AI, relating to the digital revolution. So I think this is going to be part of his brand.
I mean, as you mentioned, he's now now been Pope for 7 months, but it did take him nearly that long to take the show on the road, as it were. Do we infer anything from that? Is he a slightly more reluctant papal diplomat, perhaps, than Francis, who was, of course, an extremely enthusiastic one?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, yes, perhaps other popes traveled before he did, but he had a lot to get done beforehand. And let's also look carefully at where he chose to go. His predecessor did not go to his homeland, but both Benedict and John Paul II, their first international choice of journey was specifically to their homelands, John Paul II to Poland and Benedict to Germany. And in this case, he's chosen to go to the Middle East, where Christians are persecuted in some areas, where they're certainly a minority. And he's also mentioned that he wants to, perhaps, this is what he said in the return flight papal press conference, that is something of a tradition that we can go into later if you want. He said that he's definitely looking at Africa and possibly Algeria for another trip next year. And Algeria, again, is a Muslim majority nation. So he definitely is looking at outreach to other faiths, the Muslims, the Jews. He's definitely looking at outreach to within the Christian churches, to the Orthodoxies, and also within the Catholic Church.
Well, let's talk a bit about that flight, because there were a couple of photographs of him taken aboard the plane clutching a baseball bat, which had clearly been presented to him by somebody, and which did elicit an amount of mirth about the Vatican taking a firm line on seat recliners. Did he give anything away beyond that, though, in one of these semi-formal chats?
Yeah, such a big deal is always made about the Chicago White Sox. And by the way, when he visited the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, he took off his shoes and he was wearing white socks. And it was so interesting to see that every journalist practically seemed to comment on that. But, well, he gave us a few little nuggets, which often happens in these it's almost like an impromptu press conference. There are about 80 Vatican journalists standing at the back of what is affectionately known as Shepherd 1. And he comes to the back, and he's at such close quarters with the journalists. They give him gifts. People give him photos to be blessed. They give him, someone I think gave him a pumpkin pie on the outbound flight because it was Thanksgiving. And they ask him all sorts of questions. One of the questions, of course, was about the situation in Ukraine. And he made a point of saying that he thinks that Italy can play a bit of an intermediary role. Of course, Israel, Hezbollah subjects, those were touched upon since he was coming back from that area. And he said that he has had a few conversations with political leaders in both the U.S. and in Israel. He didn't want to get into too much detail, but he said, the Holy See doesn't broadcast the diplomatic work that they do. Their good offices are good for that reason, probably. They're very discreet. And then he also was asked what's his favorite book. And that is The Practice of the Presence of God. Not sure you've read it, Andrew, but it's by a Carmelite in the 17th century. All about doing everything you do with love for God's sake.
Not going to lie, Juliet, haven't got around to that one yet.
It's on your Christmas reading list.
It is now. Just finally, though, having now seen him in situ for 7 months, having seen him abroad once, what sense are you getting of the kind of Pope he intends to be?
Well, his predecessor was a bit of a firebrand, and Brand Leo is definitely more level-headed, less outspoken. He's a bit of an introvert. He studied maths at Villanova, and this comes across, if you want. It's still early, as we said. He hasn't been in office a year yet, but the impression that people are getting is that he's going to be balanced. We don't know what he's actually going to be stepping out into, and that we might get a clear idea in January when he holds what's known as a consistory, where he gathers all the cardinals from around the world. They last were there for the conclave when they elected him, and then he will be telling them what lies ahead in the year to come. And going back to that consistory, one of the questions in the papal flight's press conference was, how did you feel when you realized that you were about to become Pope? And he said that he had actually been thinking he was going to be retiring soon. He's just turned 70. And then he said when he saw how things were going, he said, I took a deep breath and I said, here we go, Lord, you're in charge, lead the way.
Juliet Linley, journalist and former Vatican correspondent, thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily on Monocle Radio. This coming weekend sees the Paris, Toronto and Tokyo iterations of Monocle's Christmas markets. The Paris event occurs at our studio and cafe at 16 Rue Bachemont in the 2nd arrondissement. And joining me right now from inside the owl costume is Monocle's senior producer, Laura Kramer. Laura, is this your first time wearing the Monochan costume for Christmas?
I have to say it's a lot more comfortable than I assumed, and it is so cold in Paris. The extra layers are definitely helping out. I heard you're also wearing a sparkly shirt for me, Andrew.
I am wearing a sparkly shirt. I mean, you can take that personally if you like. It was just what I grabbed off the rack as I left. But I'm trying to be somewhat festive over here, Laura. Somewhat, although not as festive as you're getting to be at the Paris Christmas market, he said, moving seamlessly along. What can people who visit expect from it?
Well, it's our first Paris Christmas market, Andrew, so it's a very special, exciting time. It's going to be very cozy, design-led, and it's not going to be a sprawling fair, but rather a very intimate affair, and I'm very excited for it. It's all kicking off at 10 a.m. local time tomorrow at our cafe, as you said, at 16 Rue Bachemont in the 2nd, and it's got a very sharp edit, I think, of makers across fashion, fragrance, homeware, food and drink, of course. We'll have glühwein, we'll have raclette. And I should say the people who are coming here, the lovely stalls that we'll have, it'll be a really nice mix of about half French brands, half international brands. We'll also have some local ones that we know. For example, our Brenda Tui will be here with Knightsbridge Rocks. So a very, very fun experience ahead for us. And not only will Monochan be around, not with me, I'm just saying. However, I'm hearing that Santa might be making an appearance.
Santa actual claus at our Christmas market. On the subject, though, of the stall holders, Laura, are there any in particular whose wares you will be hiding from the riffraff in the hope of securing a bargain towards closing time on Sunday?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have Isto here and La Fétiche, which we'll also be hearing from tomorrow on Monocle on Saturday with Emma Nelson, who's also en route. So I should say Emma Nelson also on the way. So I'm very excited. And of course, also the Monocle store is here. Lots of great goodies. And we've had so many publications in the last couple of weeks. I honestly don't know how our editors are sleeping. Have they slept? Who knows? But all our latest books and publications will also be around. So if you are looking for those last minute gifts before Christmas, it's definitely the place to come.
And also maybe, Laura, for people who are not Parisians but just visiting Paris and could be tempted not just by the Christmas market, as if that wasn't temptation enough, but by the surrounding neighbourhood, because having been there a couple of times myself, it is a genuinely delightful part of the city and one I think perhaps not as visited as a lot of others.
I think you're right. And, the last time that I was in Paris is actually when you were in Paris, when we were here for the Olympics a few summers ago, and a very different scene at Christmas. But my goodness, Paris is just so festive, truly living up to its nickname of the City of Lights, just beautiful displays everywhere. Obviously, a lot of heritage designer brands, all decked out, their storefronts, just beautiful displays. It's you take it in, and also walking along the streets, you see kids playing in the streets as they're getting ready for Santa to come, and also their holidays, but a lot of shopping happening. It's a very festive time in general, and as I'm walking around, I'm just seeing all the little cafes and bistros I'm hoping to get into, if possible, before my return to Zurich.
As I have alluded, just finally, Laura, we are now having Christmas markets in many different parts of the world. There will be one in London, not this weekend, next weekend. But if we think back to the one you are presently at, and you are, of course, a relatively recent veteran of the one in Zurich, what specifically Parisian touches are being added to our Parisian Christmas market?
Oh, that's a very exciting question, Andrew. I think it's going to be the French brands that are going to be here. And also, we've got some amazing patisserie delights. We got lots of croissants and pain au chocolat. So I didn't see that at our Zurich market. But of course, maybe I missed it because I was so busy running around. But lots of special things on the way. It's going to be a very exciting time. I think people will mostly really like how intimate it is. It's going, by the way, it's a little bit later than the Zurich market because it all all wraps up around 7 p.m. local time, 1900. So definitely something to stop by if people are, of course, around in the French capital.
And to go out where we came in, Laura, we should reiterate that we were not and never are joking about the owl costume. There is one there. Mona-chan will be present.
Mona-chan is present in my heart at all times. But yes, Mona-chan will absolutely also be making an appearance tomorrow and on Sunday. Again, it will not be me accompanying Mona-chan because I will be busy seeing to Emma Nelson. And I should say, speaking of birds and fowl, Andrew, I did run into Fernando Augusto Pacheco here. And he might cringe if I tell you, but one of his Christmas gifts that he's gotten for somebody is a taxidermy bird. So there's that.
OK, well, that's something for somebody to look forward to. However, much else for others to look forward to at the Monocle Paris Christmas Market occurring this weekend at our studio at 16 Rue Bachemont. Do drop by. You are listening to The Daily. You're listening to the Monocle Daily with me, Andrew Mueller. This weekend will see the 24th and final Grand Prix of this year's Formula One season take place around the Yas Marina circuit in Abu Dhabi. 3 drivers have a chance to be the one who will emerge from the meeting as the 2025 World Drivers' Champion. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri of McLaren, Max Verstappen of Red Bull. Neither Norris nor Piastri have won a driver's title before. Verstappen has won the last 4 in a row, and though he does not have the lead, appears to have the momentum as well as the experience. Our next guest will have a closer view than most. Ted Kravitz, who has reported from Formula One's various garages for many years, currently for Sky Sports F1. Ted collects the memories in a new book, F1 Insider, Notes from the Pit Lane. I spoke to Ted earlier here at Midori House, where once upon a time he used to host this very programme. I began by asking how preparing to host a Grand Prix compared with preparing to host the Monocle Daily.
Actually, there's more work in preparing to host the Monocle Daily because of the breadth of the subjects that you need to be across.
Excellent. I shall be passing that along to management.
And so at least there's just one subject, albeit 10 teams and 20 drivers. But it's similar in the way that you do need to be across the stories of every driver. It's impossible as a TV broadcast in any sport, and unless possibly we're talking about the Ashes, where there's one narrative and it's not so good for my side of the stumps. But there are 20 drivers out there. You need to know what's happening with all of those 20 drivers' stories. And that's what this little rambling monologue that I happen to call Ted's Notebook does. It aims, when a TV production is not able to show the story of everybody's race, to tell the story of everybody's race. That's 10 teams, 2 drivers each, 20 drivers, and they've all got something to say and something going on in their car. And it's interesting one way or the other. So you do have to prepare and follow every driver. That's easy in the era of social media when they're always keen to get their own stories out in their own ways. But sometimes it does require an equal amount of digging and research as you would do for a program such as yours, and then to find out some of the backstories, which will inform what happens later in the race, whatever the result.
You mentioned the social media age, which is, I guess, part of the added pressure that drivers are now under compared to when you first started covering the sport, and they were already under a lot of scrutiny even then. But we've also seen the Netflix series Drive to Survive, which sort of most entertainingly reinterprets Formula One as a high-octane soap opera, or I guess emphasises the soap opera aspect that was always there. What's your sense of how drivers are adjusting to the extraordinary fame that now goes with their job, bearing in mind in the week we're speaking, we have seen an awful lot of unfair pressure piled on top of a driver who, this being specifically Kimi Antonelli, who is a literal teenager?
Yeah, he had an accident all of himself, or a half spin that almost led to an accident. And then, of course, that's interpreted with the help of another team saying, well, that looked deliberate, into a sort of social media pylon. I think the more mature of the drivers, and it's hard for the 19-year-old Kimi Antonelli to understand, is that increasingly it's a bit of a show. So you just have to put up a facade on social media. You have to do a personality that you want to come across. And the reality now is very, very different. Maybe on the dawn of social media, you were likely to give away, or it was beneficial for curate your fandom to give away a little bit of your character or quite a lot of your character to show what kind of person you really were or what you really thought. Now they're realizing that there's just no mileage in that. It's just best to put out a facade, an image, you choose some photos, use it mainly for commercial gain, actually, and then just leave the rest, or any of the pylons and the comments. And hopefully the 19-year-old Kimi Antonelli will learn that.
Do you think any of that associated brouhaha has made it less of a sport? Because it just strikes me, at least just looking at social media, the tone of the fans has changed. There are a lot of people who now buy into this much as one might have, but in a rivalry between different pop stars or pop groups 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could argue there are many things that are leading Formula One to be less of a sport, not least as the management and the owners of Formula One want to move it towards entertainment. I mean, the late great Sir Frank Williams said that Formula One is a business from Monday to Sunday morning, and then a sport in the hours of the race from Sunday afternoon for 2 hours until Sunday evening. It's not now. They want Formula One is a lifestyle brand. It's entertainment for all of that time. Then there's business in there, and then maybe if you're lucky, you might get a bit of sport. But what Drive to Survive, as you say, has done is revolutionise the popularity of Formula One and has taken it from this oily rag, dirty garage floor, sniff of petrol aesthetic with a load of grimy tyres and made it into entertainment and show business. And I think there's points where that's fine, but then rather pleasingly, actually, sometimes it does come back to sport and humans making good or not so good decisions, as we saw in the latest Qatar Grand Prix, when it looked like the slightest decision, which was started, by the way, through a very sort of oily rag aesthetic reason, a very boring reason about tyres, that because of some sort of structural failings in a rubber compound, they could only do 25 laps. It led directly to a decision that wasn't so good and led one team losing and one team winning and possibly affecting the outcome of the World Championship. So it's nice to see amongst the business and the entertainment, there is a little bit of that oily rag, dirty tyre rubber, pure sport within F1 still.
Well, and human foibles and human frailties as well, which I guess brings us finally to the fact that we are speaking in between the second last and last races of the 2025 season. 3 drivers go into the last race at Abu Dhabi this weekend with the possibility of emerging from it as world champion. One of them has already been world champion several times now, in fact. Is that likely to be a factor? I'm wondering, does something get into the heads of drivers, as you see it often happen to other sports folk, when they realise I'm on the verge? It could be me. I may be about to ascend the pinnacle. There's a lot of last-minute slips.
Subconsciously, definitely. I mean, you might say you can read that kind of pressure on Lando Norris's face. He hasn't been, despite being 7 years in the sport, in that position. But then you could say the most relaxed, chilled out of characters, the guy who seems to be so laid back he's horizontal, Oscar Piastri, left Melbourne as a teenager, went to live by himself with a kind of foster family in the UK to further his racing career, has forged a mental toughness from that experience. And you thought the pressure just wouldn't get to him. We spent most of this season thinking that the pressure wouldn't get to Oscar Piastri, and even starting to look at him at the beginning of every weekend, you think, well, he's still pretty chilled out, still pretty laid back. I don't think the pressure's getting to him. Well, it has, and it does. But Max Verstappen, being 4 times a world champion, this was kind of always his plan. In a car that wasn't the equal of the McLaren of this season, he said, okay, let's just stay within touching distance, a race win or something. Actually, that went badly wrong, and he extended to 100 points behind. He's now closed that back, and the gap is now 12 with 25 points available for a win. So all Lando Norris needs to do is to be on the podium. That's 12 points. The only problem is that while there are 3 drivers still available for the title, there are still 17 drivers out there, some of which have quite good cars and are quite able to get in amongst it and have absolutely no vested interest whatever. So amongst the entertainment, amongst the business, there is this still pure sport in motor racing. And maybe a sign, if any was necessary, that F1 teams still haven't learnt from history, in that you look back at the greats, Ayrton Senna, Alain Prost, Michael Schumacher, Fernando Alonso. They knew, even Sebastian Vettel, even Lewis Hamilton, you could argue, they knew that you just have to have one driver in a team going for the championship himself, because that's the way it works. It doesn't work having 2 number 1 drivers going for a championship in the same team. McLaren have found that to their cost this season.
That was Ted Kravitz speaking to me earlier. Ted's new book, F1 Insider, Notes from the Pit Lane, is available now. This is the Monocle Daily on Monocle Radio, and to seismic upheaval in the world of fashion, where barely hours after Prada announced its €1.18 billion acquisition of Versace, Versace creative director Dario Vitale has left his post not quite 9 months into the job, a job for which he left Miu Miu, which is owned by Prada. If you are confused, you will be less so after listening to Monocle's fashion editor, Natalie Theodosi. Natalie, to Dario Vitale's predicament first, does this look like he is jumping before someone pushes him?
I think so. They said that it was a mutual agreement to part ways, but as they always do with those press releases. But something wasn't going right. It's been a while. He presented his first collection in Milan in September, and neither his former boss, Miuccio Prada, nor Donatella Versace, who he succeeded, were present. So you could feel that there's tensions. The acquisition hadn't completed yet. What is a real shame is that his first collection was extremely well received. He surprised and delighted everyone who was there. And you could see that there was real potential there with him to turn Versace around, which is struggling financially, and to make it a really successful, profitable business. But for whatever reason, they didn't hold on to a great talent and they let him go after 9 months on the job.
Because that does seem weird, because they clearly wanted him at Miu Miu, and now they don't want him at Versace.
I mean, at Miu Miu, he was design director. In the past 5 to 6 years, they've had astronomical numbers and growth that very few fashion houses have had recently. So, and it was Miuccio Prada, but it was very much his work as well. So this was a promotion to a more front-facing public role, and you could see that he clearly could do it if you looked at his first collection. If you remember when I made you critique the spring-summer collections, that was a look that you liked as well, like all the color in the 80s and what he did with reviving Gianni Versace's collections. So it's a tricky time, and they're taking the Prada group is taking Versace in relatively bad shape. There's a lot of management reshuffling as well. So something clearly didn't work out.
Because that's another aspect of it that seems strange. On the one hand, they might think they have got something of a bargain. They've paid nearly $1.2 billion for Versace, which was sold 7 years ago for $1.7 billion. So that's a €500 million discount right there. But it does seem, looking at this from outside, like having bought the thing, assuming they wanted it because they felt it was on an upswing, they have pushed out the reason that Versace might have been recovering.
Yeah. The Prada Group CEO, Andrea Guerra, he was speaking at a Business of Fashion conference recently, and what he hinted at was that they didn't want to rock the ship straight away. And Dario's vision was quite different to what Versace has been doing so far. And I wouldn't say extreme, but quite revolutionary in many ways. And it would mean that the shops change, the way they merchandise changes, the customer changes. And maybe their strategy going in is to play it safe for a while. But playing it safe in a creative industry like fashion doesn't really work. So I'm not sure if that's the right path forward.
I mean, is there a simple explanation as to why Versace had gone backwards? I know we've talked about this before, that the last few years have been a bit of a struggle for most luxury brands. But for Versace in particular, what was going askew?
To be honest, I think Versace never really found its footing. It never really took off under Donatella Versace, who struggled to be the leader of a house that her brother founded, while dealing with his loss and trying to step into his shoes, which I think is a role that she never wanted to do. So it was a house with a lot of potential. It was loved, but never quite took off. And I think they were focusing too much on red carpet gowns and a price point that is way too high for it to really reach a larger audience.
Well, just finally then, do you have any concerns that consolidation at this scale, which is, because it is pretty huge, the idea of Prada and Versace being to some extent amalgamated, that this leads to less interesting clothes on catwalks and in shops?
Oh, 100%. It's been happening for the past decade, at least, with the LVMH and carrying like all these brands being consolidated under these conglomerates. But I think the Prada group, it's still not so big. There's not much crossover between their customers, and they have resources. So I hope that they still keep creativity going and they take some risk with whoever they hire next.
Natalie Theodosi, thank you for joining us. You are listening to The Daily with me, Andrew Mueller. And finally, on today's show, our weekly assessment of how much the wiser the last 7 days have left us.
Have you ever tried this one?
We learned this week that we are living in a veritable gilded epoch of those incidents when some or other authority figure attempts to co-opt popular culture in the service of a broadly authoritarian agenda, then gets roundly yelled at by the creator of the culture in question. And those are always outstanding fun, as all right-thinking people agree. We learned that the custodians of the social media accounts of what remains of the White House had thought it would be amusing to soundtrack a gloating clip of arrests by US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, with the hit song Juno by popular warbler Sabrina Carpenter. A selection possibly made because the song's lyrics reference handcuffs, although, so far as we understand it, in a context other than the detention of suspected illegal immigrants, or indeed of US citizens and green card holders who looked a bit foreign to otherwise unemployable men who enjoy dressing up as soldiers. Anyway, we learned that Carpenter was unamused, inveighing on social media as follows, as will now be read by Monocle's celebrity disgruntlement desk chief, Anita Riota.
This video is evil and disgusting. Do not ever involve me or my music to benefit your inhumane agenda.
And we learned that broadly similar grievances had been vented on behalf of a turtle, specifically this turtle. Hey, it's Franklin. For reasons from which we may have learned much about the approximate reading level of US Secretary of Defense who thinks he's Secretary of War but isn't, Pete Hegseth.
Controversy continues to follow Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tied to military strikes against alleged drug boats. After Friday's Washington Post report raised concerns of possible war crimes, Hegseth took to social media over the weekend. He posted this, quote, fake book cover titled Franklin Targets Narco Terrorists.
Yes, we learned that Hegseth had commanded his preferred AI slop generator to rattle up a bogus book cover depicting children's cartoon character Franklin the Turtle unloading a rocket-propelled grenade at drug runners from the door of a helicopter. And we learned in few uncertain terms from Franklin's copyright holders that they did not envisage any such addition to the series, which mostly includes more wholesome titles such as Franklin Has a Sleepover, Franklin Goes to School, Franklin's Class Trip, and the Franklin Chainsaw Massacre. All right, we might have made up one of those.
Now, the Canada-based publisher behind these books was not happy. On Monday, Kids Can Press posted this statement, writing, quote, Franklin the Turtle is a beloved Canadian icon who has inspired generations of children and stands for kindness, empathy, and inclusivity, and strongly condemning, quote, violent or unauthorized use of Franklin's name or image, which directly contradicts these values.
We learned anyway, and once again, how far the United States has travelled down whichever road it is presently on, mostly by measuring the distance between the current US Secretary of Defense picking fights with a series of children's books and, say, such hypothetical historical comparisons as Robert McNamara feuding with Paddington Bear or Edwin Stanton challenging Louisa May Alcott to a duel. Ow! Something something turtle, something something America, something something shell of its former self. We assumed you'd seen the payoff coming, so didn't think it was worth spending too much time on the build-up. Hope that's okay.
I think so.
Appreciate your understanding. We did learn, however, that the present US administration's attitude towards Latin American drug runners is perhaps more nuanced than the jut-jawed table banging of Pete Hegseth might lead one to believe, as we learned more about the parameters of President Donald Trump's mercy.
Tonight, the former president of Honduras, serving time in a U.S. prison, walking free after a pardon from President Donald Trump over the weekend. Juan Orlando Hernandez was serving a 45-year federal prison sentence after being convicted on drugs and weapons smuggling charges just last year.
Or did we?
Can you explain more about why you would pardon a notorious drug trafficker?
Well, I don't know who you're talking about.
Our sympathies at this difficult time to whichever Hernandez or Hernandezes were supposed to have been pardoned, and it is, of course, a total mystery why Donald Trump, of all people, should have become preoccupied with the plight of a bellicose conservative nationalist with a recurring habit of disputing election results, an inner circle of obvious crooks and dingbats, a long career of dodgy dealing with dubious characters, and a well-chronicled history of looting the public purse, being imprisoned after serving 2 terms as his country's president. But returning to the subject of news stories likely to queue up a somewhat laboured introduction to an underwhelming punchline, and will be needing to wake the house accordionist, could someone please give Marcel a kick?
Laisse-moi tranquille.
We learned that aggrieved French folk appeared weirdly intent on making a live-action pancake.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
Tell me more. Let's see where this goes.
We learned that Jordan Bardella, leader of the National Rally Party, having barely dusted off the flour thrown at him while visiting an agricultural fair in Vesoul, had been hit on the head with an egg in Moissac.
Casse-toi.
Absolutely killing it with the sound effects this week. We learned that French Plod had, yes, cracked the case, whisked a suspect into custody and so forth, almost as if they had decided that flour was one thing, but an egg...
Oh, no.
That's an oath. Boo! For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller. That's all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Today's show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Joanna Moser. Our sound engineers were Lily Austin and Mariella Bevan. I'm Andrew Mueller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.